Whoa! Huh. We have discovered a new land.
How did these Africans come to the New World?
Okay, now one of the things, as I have pointed out in the metallurgy, like the steel, etc., in astronomy, etc., there is a profound misunderstanding of African capacity. The Africans had ships. This is one of them. This is in East Africa. This ship, this is just a model which I found in Fort Mombasa in Kenya. This ship is a 70-tonner. Ships like these in the 13th century before Columbus took elephants to China, right across the Indian Ocean. But this is just, they had ships like this in East Africa before Christ, but there were ships in North Africa along the Mediterranean that were far more sophisticated than any ships the Europeans had.
Ask any youngster, or any adult for that matter, when did Africans first come to America? And the answer will be in 1619 as indentured servants. Well, that answer is no longer valid.
What if I told you that most of the things you thought you knew about history was just the tip of the iceberg, mere twists from the real things that actually occurred? And this very much includes the true origins of America.
Lock the doors, because what I'm about to say is going to upset some people right next here. Okay. Christopher Columbus did not discover America.
Yes, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. For centuries, the narrative of America's past has been dominated by a single story, a story that begins with Columbus. But what if we told you that the roots of Black history in America stretches back thousands of years before that fateful voyage?
Anxiety. I mean, never mind the question of like how you can discover a place where the inhabitants are watching you arrive from the shore. Yeah, they weren't wearing pants. Is that what somebody said? I like that.
Join us on a journey through time as we uncover the untold stories of Black people who traversed the oceans, established thriving communities, and contributed to the rich tapestry of American history long before European contact. From the majestic kingdoms of Africa to the shores of the Americas, their legacy is woven into the very fabric of this land. Before we actually go further on this interesting discourse, do not forget to support our works by hitting that like button before you. Share with your family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing. Now to the crux of the matter.
So anyway, there were actually many other mariners before Columbus that discovered America as well. Decades earlier, even eons earlier, there were so many people that were coming across these islands and this continent. But it's only been in the last century that evidence has surfaced and continually grown to indicate that many of these pre-Columbian explorers might have come from Africa.
Christopher Columbus is a name that we know and have known for what seems like far too long. The whitewashed version of history has done him well, painting him as a courageous explorer, brilliant navigator, and overall, the person who discovered what is now America. Meanwhile, true history has reared its ugly head and revealed the horrific truth about what Columbus really did. Not only did he fail to discover anything, but he also participated in acts of mass unalivings against the natives of the land. The man had brought hell on the people he met there.
Christopher Columbus, one of the great European heroes, turns up on the island of Hispaniola. He was welcomed by the native people. They embraced them, they treated them with fantastic hospitality. His soldiers snatched babies from the breasts of their mothers and dashed their heads against the rocks. Children were fed alive to his dogs. Women's breasts were cut off. He decided to hang 13 of the Native Americans in Hispaniola to recreate the crucifixion of Jesus, plus the apostles. It's true that the majority of people died there of disease. Disease is introduced by the Europeans unwittingly, but many others were driven to death through overwork, direct murder, through starvation as their resources were taken away. Columbus insisted that everybody bring him a certain amount of gold, and those who failed to do so had their hands cut off. Some were sent back to their villages with their hands and their noses tied around their necks, having been amputated by his soldiers. And what he did there set the pattern for the genocidal extermination of almost all the Native American peoples. 100 million before Columbus made landfall. By the 19th century, that had come down to less than 1 million across the Americas. Overtly endorsed by such revered figures as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who wrote about the necessity of wiping out Native American peoples.
Not only have new developments in research shown us that the land was already occupied when Columbus arrived, but that there are many of black explorers to take note of instead of him. Voyages that took place on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were not the remarkable or revolutionary trips that Columbus and his crew thought they were. Though history has forgotten many of the people who made notable discoveries and contributions to society, we don't have to.
What is the main idea in your book, They Came Before Columbus?
The main idea in my book is to show that early America before the coming of Columbus, was a far more complex society than people imagined, and that it involved Africans. Africans came in here. They came in on several occasions. Sometimes these were accidents, sometimes they were on purpose, and that they had an influence, an actual impact and influence upon the formation of certain American civilizations.
When we say pre-Columbus period, what are we talking about?
We're talking about long before 1492. It is absurd, and only fools can still believe that Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492. In fact, Columbus never even came to this continent. Columbus wandered about in the Caribbean islands just on the very edge of the great civilizations.
Columbus landed in the Americas on October 12, 1492. He landed at a small island in the Bahamas and had 3 separate trips after that, repeatedly returning to the Bahamas, as well as an island later called Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. But the people that really discovered America are believed to have come from Asia some 15,000 years ago.
Cortez came here in 1519, and he entered Mexico. And Mexico, when I speak of Mexico in this program, do not confuse it simply with the Mexico we know today. That was a center of a civilization that spread over a great part of this continent. That, when Cortez entered, he had come out of the heart of Europe, and he said when he entered Native America, when he entered Mexico, and he saw the pyramids and the palaces and the floating gardens and the zoos and the aqueducts and the running baths, he says, I have not seen its like in Europe.
So the main idea in your book, you were dealing with that initially.
The main idea in my book is that there were visits to this continent from the old world, that there were visits to the Native Americans in this continent, and those visits included Africans. And 2 of the visits of Africans were major and significant, and they affected American civilization. And American civilization was far more complex, far more advanced than was formerly believed. Earth satellites a few months ago revealed that the Native Americans, long before the coming of Europeans, had the most intricate network of irrigation canals ever discovered in agriculture.
Shocked? Don't be. It is true. The vivid available facts point out that it was the black-skinned who had already discovered and populated America for thousands of years before Columbus sailed there and then landed in the Caribbean by some mistake. The first scientist to promote the possibility that many pre-Columbian explorers might have come from Africa was Russian-born Leo Wiener, who had emigrated to the United States in the late 19th century.
So the first scientist to promote this possibility was Leo Wiener. Born in Russia, Wiener immigrated to the United States in the late 19th century on his way to British Honduras, where he planned to open a vegetarian commune. Well, when that turned out not to be the dream job he expected, he moved back to the United States and he became a professor at Harvard University, as one does. But in his time in Mesoamerica, he started noticing things. There are lots of things that led him to encounter certain discoveries that made him consider that possibly if the origins of American civilization might actually be in Africa. So he observed so many linguistic and botanical and other similarities that between 1920 and 1922, he published an extensive 3-volume piece called Africa and the Discovery of America. Now, unfortunately, this is the 1920s, so as yet, no serious archaeological evidence had been done to, or work had been done to support his botanical theories, because everyone was over raiding tombs in Egypt and things like that. Nod to Howard Carter. So he didn't have a whole lot of other stuff than the names to support him. However, he knew that other clues must exist. For example, he pointed out that Columbus himself was aware that African mariners had preceded him. In his diary of his second voyage, Columbus tells of how the natives of Hispaniola actually had given him gold-tipped metal spearheads that they said were brought by black-skinned people who had come in large boats from the south and southeast. Coincidence? I think not. No. So what's interesting about that, so upon returning to Spain, is that he actually took the spearheads and he sent them away and they had them assayed, and it turned out to be that these spearheads were covered in this metal, this alloy that the inhabitants called guanin, and the metallurgists actually found out that this was an alloy of 32 parts. It was like 18 of gold, 6 of silver, 8 of copper, which, dun dun dun, matched the metal used in spearheads made in Western Africa for thousands of years, as carried by medieval African warriors, including the Mali and the Moors. The West Africans even called this metal guanine, the same name used by the natives of Hispaniola. But nothing more was said about that. Conspiracy. Well, probably because, in the interest of Spain, it was in their best interest that they didn't want to have any challenges to their discovery and the claims to the islands of the West Indies. Well, as the poem goes, or it should anyway, in 1493, Columbus stole all he could see.
However, contrary to popular belief, African American history did not start with slavery in the New World. The history of African presence in America, as you now hear, dates back thousands of years before the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. Though the transatlantic slave trade brought many Africans to the New World, that was not be the first time African feet touched American soil.
So on his second voyage, which was 10 times larger than the first, Columbus went on a frantic but unsuccessful island hopping trip to find gold and spices. He carried along several natives from his newly discovered San Salvador, which the inhabitants called Guanahanvi. Another island that the natives pointed out, which was really large, and was called Soameto. Soameto. Now, Columbus continued going around whimsically renaming every island he could find, but Leo Wiener, being the curious person and the linguist that he was, and the etymologist, he couldn't help noticing that the origin of these many place names and botanical names in Mesoamerica actually sounded distinctly like other languages in Africa, particularly Bantu and even Arabic.
In fact, there are several more overwhelming pieces of evidence showing that Black history in the Americas did not start with slavery. For instance, what of the talk about certain plants found today in America and also in Africa?
Wiener and numerous other botanists have also puzzled over the presence of certain plants that predated Columbus but originated in Africa. For example, the calabash bottlegourds. Now, this is a species originally from West Africa, where they were well cultivated in America before Europeans arrived. Now, even long before they existed in Indonesia or Polynesia. So, in fact, the Pacific was the last place that bottlegourds actually reached and expanded to. Pardon my covfefe. Well, if it were not for transatlantic trade, pre-Columbian times, it would be very difficult to explain how certain plants, such as the yam, the sweet potato, domesticated cotton, peanuts, and tobacco, reached both West Africa and the Americas.
Africans were adept shipbuilders. They were courageously adventurous, sailing diverse parts with their well-made boats, different sizes of them. Some housed up to 80 men, and some housed much more.
So how do these plants and languages and other cultural elements get to the Americas? Well, some believe, so what's that? Well, you're cheating. Well, some people believe that, over thousands of years, Africans migrated out of Africa and then over the Bering Strait, then down into South America, and things like that. Well, another explanation exists, and so get ready. There you go, let it out of your system. Awesome. Africans had ships. In fact, they had unbelievable. They had a shipload of vessels, and they had away. The anchors way. So, in fact, they had 4 kinds of vessels. And Nubian pottery, this is an example of Nubian pottery with a painting on it that shows a long-hold pottery art. That shows either a long-hold boat or a papyrus raft or a hauled-out canoe. And then this other painting beside it is from, the first one was from 3000 BC, and this is a bird's eye view of an oared riverboat in Chad. And it dates from 3500 BCE. Now, the Africans of Guinea also had dugout canoes hewn from these monumental trees on the coast there. In 1500, just a few years after Columbus's voyage, the Portuguese captain Pacheco Pereira wrote, "In this country can be found the largest canoes made of a single trunk. Some are so large that they hold 80 men." Now, the West Africans were known to lash 2 dugout canoes together, side by side, and no one questions the seaworthiness of a similar type of Polynesian catamarans. Well, here's a 15th century Portuguese painting of sailing canoes on the Congo estuary. The Portuguese, like Captain Pereira, had heard that African traders were visiting Brazil in the mid-1400s. So to demonstrate that mariners from West Africa could have sailed to the Americas using papyrus vessels as early as 2000 BCE, Norwegian adventurer Tor Heyerdahl actually used ancient shipbuilding techniques in order to construct and sail the Ra 1 and the Ra 2 in 1969 and 70. And generally, some type of sailing vessel will average about 100 miles per day, even without sails. And in an ocean current, something like a raft or a reed boat can average about 60 miles a day.
We have evidence that Africans not only went, but in a late pre-Columbian period, they also returned, because we found American things which Africans brought back. Just as we have found African things in America, they found American things which Africans brought back with them, such as the cotton in the Cape Verde Islands.
Are these currents still
Oh yes,
still in
oh yes,
existence?
for thousands of years, these currents have been in existence. This has been tested. 200 small boats, some of them smaller than the major African boats, have crossed the Atlantic. They have been tested. Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian explorer, got Africans to build a ship used long before the birth of Christ, used in Egypt and Ethiopia. And this ship was made of papyrus reed, and the scientists said it couldn't float. And Heyerdahl insisted, and the Africans under Abdullah de Jibrin built the ship, and it crossed the Atlantic successfully to America.
Africans were in fact so good at what they do that mariners from West Africa would sail to the Americas using papyrus vessels as early as the year 2000 BCE. They were so well skilled in ancient shipbuilding techniques that some of their sailing vessels would average about 100 miles per day, even without sails. And in an ocean current, something like a raft or reed boat can average about 60 miles a day.
Africans had ships. This is one of them. This is in East Africa. This ship, this is just a model which I found in Fort Mombasa in Kenya. This ship is a 70-tonner. Ships like these in the 13th century before Columbus took elephants to China, right across the Indian Ocean. But this is just, they had ships like this in East Africa before Christ, but there were ships in North Africa along the Mediterranean that were far more sophisticated than any ships the Europeans had. European shipping is not even European. The sail Columbus used comes out of the Arab-African world. The astrolabe comes out of the Arab-African world. They found in the desert before Columbus, in the period before Columbus, the Africans were using compasses and nautical instruments to navigate the desert. They had these instruments which were used to navigate the sea. They've done studies recently of navigation in West Africa showing the Africans did have boats along the Niger. The African had boats that could take 3 camels aboard ship. They had cabins, all of these along the Niger, which opens, if you go down the Senegambia at a certain point, it opens out into the Atlantic. And the Africans did have empires with an Atlantic border.
Historian Amir Ajib reported that voyages west from Mali were happening in the year 1311, and this was a vast 150 years before Columbus.
Now, Islamic historian Amir Hajib reported that voyages west from Mali were happening in the year 1311, just 150 years before Columbus. Now, when he asked the Mali emperor, shown here, incidentally, holding a globe of the world made of solid gold, asked him, well, tell me about this rumor about Atlantic travel. And he said that his predecessor had commissioned an expedition with 200 ships filled with men and a similar number with gold and water and enough provisions for 2 years. And he said, go out and find something. And if you don't come back, so you find something or you run out of food. And unfortunately, only one ship returned, and the captains told the emperor that we sailed for a very long time until we met what seemed like a river with a strong current flowing in the open sea. I was the last ship, and I turned where I was and did not enter the current. The others disappeared. I do not know what became of them. So, well, this story seems to describe the trade wind-driven equatorial current, or the Canary Current.
Around 1311, 181 years before Columbus, Abu Bakr, the Khel of the Mali Empire, was said to have landed in the Americas, determined to find the limits of the ocean. Bakr abdicated his throne, leaving it to his younger brother, Mansa Musa, who would go on to be the richest man in history. About a century later, Juan Garrido, an African conquistador, explored Florida along with Juan Ponce de Leon, who would later serve as the governor of Puerto Rico. Born in the Kingdom of Congo in 1487, the terms of Garrido's freedom are still not completely understood by historians to this day. While some speculate that he had a father back home who sent him to Portugal to get a formal education, others assume that he was a slave who was later set free by his owner. Nevertheless, Garrido made a name for himself as a conquistador throughout his life, searching for gold in several countries, including that of Hispaniola, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guadeloupe, and the Dominican Republic.
At least a dozen explorers, including Constantine Ravenous, reported seeing blacks upon reaching the New World. In fact, in 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa, who you might know because people named a very popular dance after him, anyway, so when Balboa was there, he said he met members of a tribe of Ethiopians in Panama. And according to Balboa's log, these men came from a totally black village that was 2 days' journey away. And he figured that these blacks had come from Ethiopia at a much earlier date. So there are also examples of physical evidence, including pre-Columbian African skeletons, which have been found throughout the Americas. Now, dating between 800 BCE and 300 CE, these murals are from the Temple of the Warriors at Chichen Itza. Now, they clearly feature, the color version is easier to see, but they clearly feature 3 races. And it's depicting black and Indian allies and a battle against white invaders. Now, because of their long blonde hair jewelry, a skin-hulled boat that we have here, right there, and also the fact that they're fighting naked, which was common for warriors from Ireland, they believe that these are Celtic warriors. And because this mural shows that blacks are clearly fighting on the side of the Mayans, that they must have been integrated into society much longer before this painting was done in order to form that form of alliance. It's obvious that Columbus was not the first to discover America, but the last.
Many years prior to Columbus's arrival in North America, African explorers were not only sailing across there for discovery purposes, but to trade items in the New World as well. In his 1976 book titled They Came Before Columbus, Ivan Van Sertima details the existence of African people who lived in ancient America. He explains that while traveling in Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, Columbus found evidence that Africans had not only been to the land before, but also traded with the natives that lived there.
in the first few pages of They Came Before Columbus, you write about when Columbus himself heard about about Africans, the possibility of Africans having been here years before. What about that?
Yes, so Columbus is the first man to give historical witness and evidence of Africans in America before him. In his journals, in his letters, you have evidence of this. He mentions that when he came back from his first voyage, he went to see the Portuguese. He didn't actually go there on purpose. A storm drew him into Lisbon, Portugal. He'd been sent out by the Spanish. The Portuguese invited him to the court, and there he learned from the Portuguese, who were moving across Africa, who had set up the first fort among Europeans in Africa, that African sailors had actually crossed over the Western Ocean and had found a land mass in the south. This was not what Columbus had found. Columbus found islands, which are now known as the Caribbean islands, but he had not gone onto a continental mass. The Africans had found the actual continental mass. And the Portuguese insisted that this continental mass in the south was 370 leagues, which is about 15 to 1600 miles away, according to whether you count a league as 4 or 4.5. There were differences in counting of a league, but it was about 1500 to 1600 miles away from Africa. And they pointed this out. And Columbus went back to Spain and he insisted, because the Portuguese promised to help him, he insisted that they should draw a line across the world, and that this line should be drawn 370 leagues away from the Cape Verde Islands across Africa, and that Spain would claim lands he had found on the other side, and if Portuguese found land within that line on the other side, they could claim it. And Brazil, which was visited by the Africans, was on the other side of the line. And this line was drawn in 1494. It was drawn up in June 1494, before any Europeans had come to South America.
Sertima explains how the natives not only recalled that the people they had traded with had black skin, but also that they carried gold-tipped spears with them. In his second voyage, Columbus sent back samples of the spears to find out that they were made of guanin, which is a mix of gold, silver, and copper. It was later found out that guanin has origins in several of the Mande languages in West Africa, including those of Mandingo, Kabunga, Taranka, Kankanka, Bambara, and Vai. Sertima writes that in Columbus's journal, gold is given as koana, while guanin is recorded as an island where there is much gold. So while we commend Christopher Columbus for sailing the seas in search of new land on Europe's behalf, it should be recalled that he was not the first to make that journey, as widely untaught evidence exists, suggesting that Africans made it to the Americas after the first Americans arrived on the continent, centuries before Columbus ever did. Here is more evidence to show that black history in the Americas did not start with slavery. The strongest evidence of African presence in America before Columbus comes from the pen of Columbus himself. According to an American historian and linguist, Leo Weiner of Harvard University, one of the strongest pieces of evidence to support the fact that Africans sailed to America before Christopher Columbus was a journal entry from Columbus himself.
On several occasions, Africans were able to make that journey. If you look at a map of currents, and we will look more closely at this later on in the program, you will see there are 3 currents that take you from Africa to America. Africa is half the distance from America as is Europe. Not only is it half the distance, it is far easier to get from Africa to America because the currents take you automatically. In other words, you don't have to know of the existence of America. Even Columbus was not aware of the existence of America. He came off the North Atlantic. Columbus thought he was going to India, and he struck out for the latitude of Japan, hoping to land in India, and he swore he was in India. That is why people like myself are called West Indians. I'm the Indian he found in the West. And Americans are called American Indians because he thought they were in India. So that you have these currents which take you automatically. European ships did not use these currents until the second voyage, when Columbus used that knowledge which he got from the Portuguese about Africans. On the second voyage, Columbus heard from the American natives in Hispaniola, which is now known as Haiti and San Domingo, that Africans had come to the Native Americans. The Americans told Columbus that. He recorded it in his journals, that Africans had come to them trading in gold-tipped spears.
In 1920, Leo Weiner, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, explained how Columbus noted in his journal that Native Americans had confirmed that black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats, trading in gold-tipped spears. It was found also that the ratio of properties of gold, copper, and silver alloy were identical to the spears then being forged in African Guinea.
Columbus sent samples of those spears. They were studied, they were surveyed in Spain, and they were found to contain the same ratio of gold, silver, and copper alloys as those found in West African Guinea.
It is said that the inhabitants of Hispaniola were the ones to confirm this to Columbus, as he wrote in his journal of the second voyage. Other explorers like Vasco Núñez de Balboa, a Spanish explorer, who is best known for crossing the Isthmus of Panama to the Pacific Ocean in 1513, also reported sighting black people off Panama. There were dark-skinned people in the Caribbean long before the Atlantic slave trade and long before the arrival of Columbus. But there are some historians that say Columbus was misinterpreted. He simply said there were people that painted their skins black, which might suggest that Native Americans were the ones with the painted faces he was referencing. One of the first documented instances of Africans sailing and settling in the Americas were black Egyptians led by King Ramses III during the 19th dynasty in 1292 BC. In fact, in 445 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs' great seafaring and navigational skills. Further concrete evidence noted by an Egyptian chancellor to the king Djoser, Dr. Imhotep, and largely ignored by Eurocentric archaeologists includes Egyptian artifacts found across North America, from the Algonquin writings on the East Coast to the artifacts and Egyptian place names in the Grand Canyon. In 1311 AD, as earlier pointed out, a major wave of African exploration to the New World was led by King Abubakar II, the ruler of the 14th century Mali Empire, which was larger than the Holy Roman Empire. The king had sent out 200 ships of men and 200 ships of trade material, crops, animals, cloth, and crucially, African knowledge of astronomy, religion, and the arts. African explorers crossing the vast Atlantic waters in primitive boats may seem unlikely, or perhaps far-fetched to some. But such incredible nautical achievements are not as daunting as they seem, given that numerous successful modern attempts have illustrated that without an oar, rudder, or sail, ancient African boats, including the dugout, would certainly have been able to cross the vast ocean in a matter of weeks. As time allows us to drift further and further away from the European age of exploration, and we move beyond an age of racial intellectual prejudice, historians are beginning to recognize that Africans were skilled navigators long before Europeans, contrary to popular belief. Of course, some Western historians continue to refute this fact because, consciously or unconsciously, they are still hanging on to the 19th century notion that seafaring was a European monopoly. After all, history will tell you that seafaring is the quintessential European achievement, the single endeavor of which Europeans are awfully proud of. Seafaring allowed Europe to conquer the world, so the notion that black Africans braved the roaring waters of the Atlantic Ocean and beat Europeans to the New World threatens a historically white sense of ownership over the seas. Also, when most people think about ancient Mexico, the first civilizations that come to mind are the Incas, Aztecs, and the Maya. However, during the early 1940s, archaeologists uncovered a civilization known as the Olmecs of 1200 BCE, which predated any other advanced civilization in the Americas. The Olmec Civilization was one of the most well-known examples of early African presence in America. The civilization, which was of African origin and dominated by Africans, was the first significant civilization in Mesoamerica and considered the mother culture of Mexico by many historians. This civilization existed between 1200 to 400 BCE in the areas that are known today as the states of Veracruz and Tabasco. One of the main things this civilization is known for is the gigantic stone head carving of their leaders. The carvings clearly depict African faces.
Now I want you first to look at this head, this stone head.
Okay.
Now this head, they found a dozen of these heads. They found them in a very specific area. Before we go to the area, look at the head carefully. The lips, the very generous type of lips that you find in the tropical areas, the Africoid type. The broad nose with the very broad flared type of nostril and the kind of flattened base. The brow ridge. And look at the helmet. That's a very peculiar type of helmet. It does not occur anywhere else in America. It has a strap along the face, falling along the ear, and it has a circular ear plug. Those helmets, exact type of helmet, were found in the Egyptian world in this period. What period? The period that has been dated by carbon-14 datings.
This civilization was also responsible for introducing written language, arts, and mathematics to Mesoamerica civilization. The first of these gigantic stone heads were discovered by explorer Jose Melgar in Veracruz in 1862. He wrote, "What astonished me was the Ethiopic type which it represents. I reflected that there had undoubtedly been blacks in this country. The Olmec people were known for their advanced agricultural practices, monumental stone sculptures, and complex social structures. Many historians and archaeologists believe that the Olmec civilization was influenced by African cultures, as evidenced by the similarities in their art and religious practices. Enormous Olmec head statues, with African facial characteristics found throughout Central and South America, support that Africans had settled in America long before its apparent discovery. Ranging up to 11 to 15 feet in height and weighing 30 to 40 tons, these statues generally depict helmeted black men with large eyes, broad fleshy noses, and full lips. An ancient African historian, Professor Van Sertima, has also illustrated how Olmecs were the first Mesoamerican civilization to use a written language, sophisticated astronomy, arts, and mathematics, and they built the first cities in Mexico, all of which greatly influenced the Mayans and subsequent civilizations in the Americas. Michael Coe, a leading historian in Mexico, once remarked, "There is not the slightest doubt that all later civilizations in Mexico and Central America rest ultimately on an Olmec base." Another clear indicator of pre-Columbus African transatlantic travel is the recent archaeological findings of narcotics native to America in ancient Egyptian mummies, which have astounded contemporary historians. German toxicologist Svetla Balabanova reported findings of cocaine and nicotine in ancient Egyptian mummies. These substances are known to only be derived from American plants, South American cocaine from Erythroxylon coca and nicotine from Nicotiana tabacum. Such compounds could only have been introduced to ancient Egyptian culture through trade with Americans. Similarities across early American and African religions also indicate significant cross-cultural contact. The Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas all worship black gods, and the surviving portraits of the black deities are revealing. For instance, ancient portraits of the Quetzalcoatl, a Messiah serpent god, and Ekahua, the god of war, are unquestionably Negro with dark skin and woolly hair. Now, why would Native Americans venerate images so unmistakably African if they had never seen them before? Numerous wall paintings in caves in Juxtlahuaca, southwestern Mexico, depict the famous ancient Egyptian opening of the mouth and cross libation rituals. All these religious similarities are too large and occur far too often to be mere coincidences. Professor Everett Borders, a U.S. innovator, notes another very important indication of African presence, which is the nature of early American pyramids. Egypt is famous for ancient pyramids, but the Americas actually have more pyramids than any other place in the world. But the Egyptian pyramids are much older and show signs of progress from the earliest pyramids built to the more sophisticated and enormous pyramids that are now famous. However, the pyramids found in Central America don't show the same level of progress. That suggests that whoever built the American pyramids had already mastered pyramid building by the time those pyramids were built, which points the finger to Africans who likely sailed over to the Americas with that knowledge and constructed them in America. The earliest known pyramid in the Americas is found in Tabasco, Mexico, and was built by the Olmecs, the same civilization known for the gigantic stone heads. Therefore, the great ancient civilizations of Egypt and West Africa traveled to the Americas, contributing immensely to early American civilization by importing the art of pyramid building, political systems, and religious practices, as well as mathematics, writing, and a sophisticated calendar. Furthermore, archaeologists have discovered ancient skulls and skeletons that they believe belong to people of African descent. In a 1975 publication by the New York Times, it is stated that a Smithsonian Institution team reported finding 2 Negro male skeletons in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The soil from the earth layers in which the skeletons were found was dated around 1250 A.D. Polish professor Andrzej Wiercinski has also testified to the discovery of African skulls at Olmec sites. More ancient skeletons that archaeologists believe are Africans have also been discovered in other locations in Central and South America, further pointing to the fact that Africans had known America soils longer than we were made to believe. Most historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and other scientists and scholars now know that Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. Not only were Native Americans present when he reached the New World, but also Chinese, Phoenicians, and Europeans, among others, had been sailing to the Americas thousands of years before Columbus ventured across the Atlantic. Adding to these facts is a recent book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, written by a brilliant African-American scholar, David Imhotep. Imhotep's thesis is by far the most revolutionary viewpoint ever published on this subject. Unlike his predecessors, he does not claim that Africans simply sailed to the Americas before Columbus and influenced the Native Americans who resided in the New World. He states instead that the Native Americans themselves were black Africans who first reached the New World at least 56,000 years ago, citing skulls and skeletons, footprints in lava, campsites, genetic markers, linguistics, paintings, carvings, architecture and Egyptian writing, artifacts and structures. Dr. Imhotep shows that there were 2 major groups that populated ancient America. The first were black Africans, who began sailing to the New World tens of thousands of years ago. They were short people who appear to have been the ancestors of modern pygmies. According to Dr. Imhotep, the second group to reach the Americas in ancient times were the Mongolians, who first arrived about 3000 BC. They traveled from Asia across the Bering Strait, down through Canada, and into North America. There they met Africans who had preceded them. Some Mongolians mixed with the indigenous African. Others conquered or exterminated the black people. The black and Mongolian mixture resulted in what we know today as the Red Indian. In other words, the Indian on the original American nickel, the Indian of our school textbooks, and the Indian of Hollywood fame do not represent the original Native American. They were indeed early Americans, but they were descendants of indigenous Africans, that is, the first Americans and invading Mongolians. The earliest and most pervasive evidence of their presence are the strange structures called Native American mounds. Built by black Africans, these structures still survive in 41 states of North America. One such mound, the Cahokia of Illinois, is almost as large as the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Further evidence, recognized by Dr. Imhotep and largely ignored by archaeologists, includes Egyptian artifacts that have been found across North America, from the Micmac and Algonquin writings on the East Coast to the artifacts in Egyptian place and names in the Grand Canyon. Additionally, when you consider all the above evidence with the fact that ancient Africans were masters at shipbuilding, it is no-brainer that they more than likely made it to the Americas from West and North Africa long before Columbus did. Shipbuilding and sailing have a history of over 20,000 years in the Sahara. There are cave wall paintings of ancient ships documenting this tradition. Ancient Egyptians were pioneers in shipbuilding. One example of this is the ancient Egyptian king Khufu's ship, which is a vessel that is 44 meters long and was buried at the foot of the Khufu's Great Pyramid in Giza, around 2500 BC Thai, was discovered with its structure still intact in 1954. Furthermore, ancient transatlantic similarities in botany, religion, and pyramid building constitute but a fraction of the signs of African influence in ancient America. Other indicators are astronomy, art, writing systems, flora, and fauna. Historically, the African people have been exceptional explorers and purveyors of culture across the world. Throughout all of these travels, African explorers have not had a history of starting devastating wars on the people they met. The greatest threat towards Africa having a glorious future is her people's ignorance of Africa's glorious past. Pre-Columbus civilization in the Americas had its foundation built by Africans and developed by the ingenuity of Native Americans. Sadly, America, in post-Columbus times, was founded on the mass unalivings of the indigenous Americans, built on the backs of African slaves, and continues to run on the exploitation of workers at home and abroad. Sad also is the fact that despite this evidence of early African presence in America, the history of African contributions to the development of the Americas has often been overlooked or marginalized. The legacy of slavery and racism has obscured the true extent of African influence on American culture, society, and history. In truth, Africans began coming to the Americas thousands of years before Columbus, and the evidence of their presence, though systematically ignored by mainstream and K-12 education curriculum, is overwhelming and undeniable. Even early Mexican scholars were convinced that the impact of the Black explorers on the New World was profound and enduring. One author, J.A. Villacorta, has written thus: "Any way you view it, Mexican civilization had its origin in Africa." Indian scholar Rafiq Jairazboy appears to have been right when he wrote, "The Black began his career in America not as slave, but as master." For many decades, the lives and adventures of African explorers and settlers had remained hidden in the shadows, largely unknown due to a lack of evidence, as well as the whitewashing of history. But now, thanks to many Black researchers, we as a people can live with the knowledge of what those who came before us have done for society. We can now know the truth of how our ancestors risked their lives on long voyages and adventures to places that were once considered unknown. Though history was once heavily whitewashed with the intention of keeping us in the dark and stealing our self-worth, we no longer have to live this way. With these newfound discoveries, we can hold our heads high, knowing that we have always been innovative and adventurous, ready to make strides and push boundaries with hopes of changing the world. And instead of mistakenly giving all the credit to Christopher Columbus as history once did, we can learn about the explorers and settlers who sailed the 7 seas to make Black history. The growing body of evidence is now becoming simply too loud to ignore the narrative of African civilization in the Americas before Columbus. It therefore challenges the Eurocentric view of history that has dominated for centuries, and it invites a reevaluation of the interconnectedness of cultures and the shared human experience. Thus, it's about time education policymakers re-examine their school curriculums to adjust for America's long pre-Columbus history. This is because, by recognizing the contributions of Africans to the development of civilization in the Americas, we can foster a more inclusive understanding of history that honors the diverse legacies of all peoples. In conclusion, the story of Africans bringing civilization to America before Columbus is one of exploration, resilience, and cultural exchange. While definitive evidence of pre-Columbian African presence in the Americas remains a topic of debate, the possibility of such interactions encourages us to look beyond traditional narratives and consider the rich tapestry of human history. By acknowledging and exploring this rich and complex history, we can gain a deeper understanding of the diverse and interconnected roots of American society. It is crucial to continue researching and sharing these untold stories to honor the contributions and resilience of Black communities throughout history. And as we continue to uncover the complexities of our past, it is essential to acknowledge and celebrate the contributions of all cultures in shaping the world we know today. That brings us to the end of yet another informative video segment. Do not forget to support our endeavors by hitting the thumb up button in front of you. Share video with family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to stay tuned into the channel for more mind-filling updates ahead. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.